Old Salem is a fairly intense history site. 226 employees. There are 60 private residences within the entire historic district, over 100 acres of interpreted landscape. Old Salem runs 25 historic buildings with 90 structures totally. So there is this kind of quality of it being kind of a cute old section of town, but in fact, it's a kind of massive undertaking. And in fact, a typical high volume day is around 1,000 students from 10 schools, add around 125 teachers and chaperones, 15 buses, and all of that back in 2008, I believe, was around a $9 million budget. The budget sheet at the bottom really shows you what Old Salem was dealing with. They had 226 employees. They had a $9 million operating budget, and believe it or not, they were running $1.6 million deficits every year, and they were dipping into their line of credit and into board restricted funds in the endowment to pay for those. So all of those red numbers in that bottom chart are deficits at the end of the year. The thing for us to talk about is they didn't change the interpretive model. Labor heavy living history site model. Digging into this, what we found out was every visitor was subsidized $84.89. The endowment paid for $36 of that, which meant that Old Salem had to raise close to $4 million every year to break even. This should tell you this is a non-sustainable model for this hot site. Many history sites are clinging to these traditional 1950s models, which are not really being able to be sustained except in suppressing pay of employees so that they can keep the same business model, which was established in 1950. And so this model hasn't changed. So the first thing we did is we started data collection. I formed an open door policy in the president's office. These stickies over here, I'm showing you a new idea of the organizational structure. We looked at the site itself. We invited community members to come in, give us their ideas. And you'll see at the bottom, I spent time in almost every job in the first 6 months. And I asked all of the employees, whether they're accountants or COO. My COO is standing on the far right in an apron, passing out cookies. And this is how we collected the data. So none of this could have happened without the board. They knew what they were getting into, and it was incredibly supportive, and they continue to be incredibly supportive. We also jumped in and did a total program analysis. I can't go into the details because of the time, but we had around 70% of the programs that Old Salem was putting on were unprofitable. There were also divisions that were putting on similarly themed programs that didn't know the other divisions were doing it. And so we've gone from 2016 and 17 with 70% unprofitable to 2019, 100% of them are profitable. And then you'll see some of the signature programs that we moved into after this program analysis. We put together an entirely new budget spreadsheet that every program had to go through, and we weeded out the ones that no longer served community needs. From the very beginning, we formed an equity initiative. I'm also showing you on these slides primary crowdsourced critiques. These were both from visitors and from staff. And so when we heard these critiques, we wrote them down, and our job was to solve them. This diagram on the right with the circles was a new idea. Instead of the hierarchical corporate structure, this is putting the visitors and the front-facing staff at the center, with me and the board on the outside as supporters of the primary visitors and frontline staff. And the graph to the left is showing you that when I came down to Old Salem, many people with advanced degrees were making minimum wage. I very quickly reduced my salary, and we started on a very intensive policy and structural change, making sure that staff parity, both in gender and pay, was introduced. And we've gone from $725 as the base pay to $1118 in 3 years. And please understand that living wage in Winston-Salem is $10.75. So wherever you are, whatever your living wage is, we're paying above living wage. And our hope is that we continue to move that upward. Also, as part of this equity initiative, when I got to Old Salem, it was a leadership team of 3 people with no diversity making the policy decisions. The bottom left shows you our new 21-person leadership team, which I consider a collaborative leadership team. And everything that we talk about and do, from policies to anything COVID-related, goes through weekly meetings with that team. And you'll see this chart to the side. I'm being very transparent with our diversity and inclusion numbers. These are better than they were 3 years ago. Progress, not perfection. But I will say that we're moving in an incredibly powerful way towards overall equity throughout the organization, both in terms of pay, but also in terms of leadership and policy making. One of the problems was that the administration was cited as not being very communicative. Right away, I started having town hall meetings. We have those regularly. We're now having them, because of COVID, online every month. And at the bottom of this slide, and you can go on the website, I produce a quarterly president's update, which talks about everything. Believe me, more information than you would ever want and that you would ever get from a nonprofit, you get there. And so the communication level has really skyrocketed. Also, I don't want to underestimate just basic welcoming. People felt like Old Salem was a private garden club. So I'm showing you some images and videos right now of how we changed substantially every level of the visitor experience. We took things that were behind the scenes, like the seed saving lab and the research and archaeology lab. They are now public facing. Everything we do is public facing. Also, I told you we have residences, which are mixed in with our interpreted buildings. The Historic Resources Commission wouldn't allow us to have signage. It took me 9 months to get these large slate signs you see on the far right. But now people can actually find where they're going. We moved very small interpreted sites into large rooms, put tables for 15 in them. So you can see everything we did was thinking from the perspective of the visitor experience. We also dealt with interpretation. The picture in the middle is the Tavern Room of Reflection and Dialogue. And this is open to the public, so anybody can come into it. It's part of our Hidden Town program. With our Hidden Town Research Project, which is the study of the enslaved, we started it in 2016. We started a mapping exercise. The map on the top row right in red shows you where all of the enslaved lived and worked throughout Salem, which gives you an idea of how fully integrated the enslaved narrative was. And now we have text panels, and the stories of the enslaved, as we research it, are integrated fully throughout the entire site. We've also started a Cherokee Advisory Committee, and we're doing extensive public programming about this. We also got critiques, and it's something that I have long felt. I felt it in New York City as well, that history sites love to be grandfathered in and not provide access for people with cognitive to mobility impairments. We started Access Salem, and we have done extensive integrations of exploratorium boxes, new maps for people that need additional services. We're looking at ramps and new visitor orientations. All of this is circling around the needs of people. And what we found, and we've been having an Access Salem Day is that many of the people with physical disabilities and cognitive disabilities didn't come to Old Salem because they thought they weren't welcome and they weren't able to enter the buildings. We also fundamentally changed the experience. One of the critiques was that there wasn't much to do at Old Salem. We've gone from 10 ticketed venues to around 25 ticketed venues. That's basically coming from rethinking and reallocating resources. Many of these are now hidden town sites. And so when you come to Old Salem, in fact, we've given it 2 days because you can't see everything in one day. And when I came, people were saying you could see Old Salem in around an hour. And I'm showing you a lot of the different things that are happening at Old Salem right now in terms of the visitor experience.
1, 2, 3, go. Push down, and fold it over. One more time, push down.
So I'm showing you on the far right on the bottom is a boarded off room in Winkler Bakery. And the video you just watched is what happens now in Winkler Bakery. And so you get a sense of the degree and level of change that has happened at Old Salem. We've also introduced contemporary context. Very interested in pulling the Moravian idea of what it was to be American into stories that also are tied into the Hidden Town Project. We now have a out of bounds artists fellowship that King, the far left, is a person on the autism spectrum. We have Nico, who's a Colombian immigrant. And we just have an incredibly diverse body of artists who are now coming in and reinterpreting Old Salem, and we fully integrated into the historic sites. And you'll see an Artomat in the middle of the boys' school, and all of the artwork inside of the Artomat was designed by artists. And so if you look now back at that budget sheet, you'll see that we have reduced the budget from $8 million down to around $5.96 million. Before COVID, we were at 134 employees, and we have reduced the endowment draws down from 10.75. In 1 year, we'll be down to 5% across the entire board. And so what does this mean from the visitor experience? Well, I do believe in TripAdvisor. We've been getting consistent 5-star ratings. Last time I checked, it was 40 5-star ratings. We're getting statements. I've been here 10 times for my school. However, this 10th was the best. Old Salem has had something of a makeover, and it's wonderful. I don't ever remember Old Salem being like this. I don't ever remember being able to actually go into Winkler Bakery. These are the kinds of things that we're starting to see as visitor comments. And then also the program analysis started to show us which programs needed to be looked at, which ones were tweaked, and programs that were barely making money before are now making $50,000, and the programming experience is far better than it was before. Many of our programs are selling out, like our Landscape, Race, and Culture conference, which before was always losing money. They made around $10,000 this year. And then what's this mean about development? We actually reformed our development team, and we restructured our mission for development. And we became a broken record. We want multi-year, unrestricted, 6-figure grants. Multi-year, unrestricted, 6-figure grants. And we have started to receive just that. You're also seeing other large funding elements that are funding not the traditional preservation or the traditional experience, but the new innovations that we're moving towards. Corporations and funders are appreciating the new ideas that are coming out. And at the bottom, you're also seeing a series of awards that have been given to Old Salem with recognition about what we're doing. So what does this mean by the numbers? Even though I don't believe that attendance is the sole read of the success, fourth quarter 2019, right before COVID, we all know where that took us. Group tour attendance was up 8%. walk-in attendance 2.3, overall revenue was up 13%, and our development team, which had been restructured and now masterfully led by Michelle Cook, whom I asked to come out of retirement, were above 19% increase in our funding. You know, our COVID responses actually were almost immediate, and that is because of everything that I talked about before. And so those things really jumped on board. We transformed all our gardens into produce gardens for local food banks. Our bakeries turned over right away, and we started baking bread for free for local families. Those sorts of things we were able to do because we had become much more focused on the community. Our staff and our collaborative leadership team was able to bring new ideas, and we were able to vet them. And also, we did some really extensive COVID research. This is looking at our historic spaces. There's no way that the small buildings could have been able to hold precautions. Old Salem is not open in a traditional sense, but we are open in other ways. And this is what we're doing right now. I'm about to launch. So this is a choose your own character using your smartphone exterior tour of Old Salem. And what you're really seeing is now a resolution of all of those issues that I talked about before. Because if you look at the characters at the bottom in Salem Pathways, those are all fairly marginal characters whose stories were not being told before. And we were able to do that because we had established this system and that we had this new idea of what it meant to be equitable within the entire system.